Hi everyone. Today for our art project, we are going to draw a winter polar bear. So we are going to show objects on your drawing that show form, texture, and value. And here is our project right here. So we're going to make him. So what are we doing today? Today we will draw a polar bear with form, texture, and value. Form is when something has shape. A circle starts to look like a ball. We will do this by showing texture, which is the thick, coarse fur. It means it's not super soft. We will also use value, which is when we make areas darker by shading and adding color, or when it's lighter by adding white. We're not going to be adding white this time because we're drawing a white polar bear. So what will we learn? How to use our art supplies to make flat shapes look like forms, things we can pick up. What supplies do I need? A pencil, some plain white paper, and something to color with if you want. Use anything you have. I recommend crayons or colored pencils, but you could do this project completely in pencil if you want. Watch the video carefully and follow directions. Drawing polar bears is not that difficult. We can tell where this polar bear is with his background, and this one is a couple of different pictures here showing a snooping polar bear. He's curious about a camera. They really love to sort of check out what's going on with drones, and they're very curious animals. What we need to work on is when we're looking at these pictures, look at how much of the polar bears we can see in our photos. A lot of times we're not going to be able to see the whole thing. So we might only see the two front paws like on here. On here, another one where we really can't see the back legs at all, and we need to be okay with that. So when we're looking at pictures from above, it really gives you the idea a little bit better. The cubs here still, you can't really see their feet, and there's another one we can only see a couple feet on them. And that's all right because we want to draw things where we would actually see what it looks like. Here you can't really see his back leg and his claws that much. So that's what we want to focus on in our pictures. Also, this is a polar bear in a zoo. And you can tell the polar bear against the zoo background, but look at the ice background here. You can't really tell where the polar bear ends except for the texture of his fur and the shading. It's very, very different from ice. So unless you get really far away where you can see really serious changes in color and lots of grays, it's a little hard to tell when they're walking around on ice like this. So we want to kind of do a drawing like that where we have a polar bear who's walking, and here you can see the texture changes. That's what we want to draw. So this is a long drawing this time. You want to just let it play and watch it so that you can see how we're going to add the texture and the shading on the fur to show different parts. I like this one here. I think he's checking out a drone that's taking pictures, and here he is again. You can just see he's moving around. So when they take pictures with drones or cameras from above, they're pretty interesting. They do sometimes have flowers. They don't always have ice, but that would just be in the summertime. It's usually wintertime all year round. So we're going to look at a picture like this. We're going to make a polar bear like this in our picture. Even though we like to show all four paws and everything, we're not always going to see it in the pictures, and that's what we want to focus on. Make sure that you take a photo of your finished drawing and upload it for me in Teams in the assignments section. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Make sure you're okay with your pictures and just let the video play while you draw. All right, so we're going to start on our polar bear drawing. And the first thing that we want to do is get the basic size of the head in our picture. So I'm going to draw it on here. And what I want to do is get that head a little bit to the side, and I'm going to draw it lightly. Okay, so once I have it drawn lightly, then I'll come in and do my fur to make it look like fur. So once I've got that drawn, then I'll come on in and add my fur when I'm finished with all of my basic shapes. So that gives us the head, and we'll go ahead and do the ears. There's sort of a longer ear than probably you'd be used to drawing a teddy bear kind of picture. So longer ear there. And then I'll go ahead and do where the snout is. Now the snout's going to be a little closer to me, so I'm going to draw a nice circle around there. And I'm just drawing these nice and dark so you can see. You want to draw lightly so that you can make eraser marks. I mean, you can go ahead and erase it without it leaving a big mark. So this one's going to be one of the basic drawing to get started with, okay? And instead of you watching me erase everything, I'm going to use this one to show it with the texture, with the actual hair on it. So I've got my head about in the center of my paper and a little bit over so that we can show the back legs on the bear. So we want to have him a little bit to the side. He's not completely facing forward. Then what I want to do is come along and get sort of the shoulders and the legs. So that's going to be a large curving area that's going to go up here. I'm going to go ahead and let it go behind the ear on this one. Here's this other ear. And go behind here. And sort of go behind the other ear a little bit and come on down. Now, since it's a white animal with white fur and he's sort of on a white background of ice, it's up to us to add in that texture because it's really the only texture and shading are really going to be the only details that we can do for a polar bear to give him some form. So I know that his feet are going to be around here. I'm going to go ahead and draw his feet in, and I'm going to just draw up a little bit and across and come on down. But the thing is, they've got big, big claws that stick out. And so their fingernails, which would be, our fingernails would be like their claws, they want to kind of be pointed. So I want to make that point, and then I'll just come up and sort of round it off. So make another point, so come up and round it off. And they have 5 toes like we have 5 fingers. Point, round it off, point, round it off, and point, and round it off. Then I'll bring my paw around and attach. I'll get my fur in between his fingers. They kind of look like fingers when you actually look at a skeleton of a polar bear. They kind of look like our hands with our fingers. All right, so I want to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to make his paw. All right, and I want to add my 5 toes, point and turn. And I'm just sort of going to make this a little more angled. Polar bears don't care about nice straight pictures. All right, so I got my claws in there, get my line in between them. Right. And then I want to go in between here to sort of distinguish where it is between the paws. Now what happens with them, I'll just add this little loop here. What happens with them is this sort of overlaps. So you could actually add in a bunch of fur in here to show where the fur meets, but you can worry about that later. We just want to get our basic form in for right now. And they are very long, tall animals. Bears are very, very long, not necessarily pandas, but sometimes. So we want to give a good amount of space that shows the back of that body. Come up with my curve. And I'm not making it perfectly center because I want to show one of his back legs in here. So that would be even behind that. Polar bears these days are getting pretty skinny because of what's happening with their environment, but we're going to pretend he's nice and healthy and he's had some good food. So come down with the leg. Now this is going to be a little smaller and we're not going to see everything. So here comes the paw and point. Okay, for one claw, but then I'm going to run out of room and that's okay. I'm making them just a little bit smaller than these here. But that's okay because it's in the distance and it's behind the back of his body. So then I'll finish off the face. Now, polar bears have very, very large noses on the end of those long snouts. And they actually have a mouth that sort of comes down. Let's get his eyes in. I want to make them sort of in line with my ears. I don't need to do a full circle because they're not sticking up over the snout. We've got to remember that if it doesn't stick up, it doesn't need to be a perfect size. And I want to do the same thing with the ears. I'm just going to go in there a little bit. Sometimes you can't see the inside of a polar bear's ears, but sometimes you can. And you could make the mouth, they sort of have this mouth that goes across. That's up to you if you want to add it. So make sure those are nice and dark. So when I'm drawing this, it's a polar bear. He lives on ice. He's got white fur and a white background. So adding texture and shading is the only thing that's going to make him stick up from the ice that he's standing on. We can draw some lines in when we add the shading to sort of show that there's texture to the snow, this kind of thing. So it looks like he's walking on a bumpy surface. We can do that, but since it's white on white, you're really not going to see much change. So we'll go ahead and add in a background of some bumpy lines for the ice. And then you're going to want to add in your background. Now, we always want to draw pine trees and stuff for winter scenes, but they don't have them where polar bears live necessarily. So maybe just some big snowflakes would be good. I think I'll just do some chunky ones just for fun. So you can draw something that's fun that you want to add in here. Just some nice big 6-sided or 8-sided snowflakes for me. Okay, so I can just do a bunch of them so that it looks like snow is falling. So I would finish that up and draw a nice colored background. Now, what you need to do, hopefully you have your lines lighter than I do in this example. I'm going to finish it up, but because you don't need to be seeing me erase, and I want to have this here for you to refer to, I'm going to make another drawing with sort of the texture of the hair. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how I did that so that you can add those in. So you want to have your lines be light, and it's okay with erasing. We don't want to add lines to show texture because polar bears are very, very, very furry. It's not little bits of fur, it's big amounts. So we'll just do that, and I'll go ahead and finish that on this one with the fur, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I will go ahead and get that one started. So you can pause your video and start thinking about stuff for your background and make sure that your lines look good. Rewind it if you need to go over it again, and then we'll come on back. All right, so I have put in some texture on this one, but I know it's not easy to see. So I'm going to go over it with some colored pencil so that you would understand, like I'm going over my lines. This would be if I erased everything and I'm all set. So I'm using a colored pencil so it'll show up on the camera, but you don't have to use one if you don't have it. So I'm just going to go over the lines, and what I'm doing for mine is I'm just making little spikes or lines. So if I were going to add them on this bear, I can come around and do lines that go sort of along with the curve in the circle, but then I also want to add some lines that are going to stick out to look like chunks of fur. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on this because he's really furry. I don't really want to see a lot of smooth fur on him. So I'm just going around and adding nice chunks of fur or lines along that circle that look like fur. So when you're doing that on yours, now you can draw with a much heavier line. You can really go in there and really make it darker so it'll stand out. But I don't want to get rid of this in case you need it to look at. So I'm going to do it on this one. And I'm just going around. And I'm using a colored pencil, which does not erase very well. So if I were not doing this and I didn't know, I'm new to it, I would probably stick with just dark pencil marks. So going around on this side now, I'm going to make them point down on this side. There's some lines that kind of go out and then some bumps that go back in. They're little points. I don't need them sticking out far like the stars, just a little bit. So just a little bit of line coming out. Kind of looks like a hook. And do some nice lines that look like fur. So now that we've got these lines here, we're showing sort of the texture. I'm going to do some little pointy zigzaggy ones here for the bottom of his nose where it's going across and meeting. But we're showing texture by showing that he is very, very, very hairy and furry. And that's thick fur. It's not little skinny lines that would show maybe something soft like a cat. We want something really thick. So they don't need to point out far, but we need a lot of them. So good short strokes on the top of his muzzle. You don't really need anything, but the hair would be going down on this side, following the curved line that I made for his snout. And then on this side, they're going to fall in the other direction, going down this way. Gravity is pulling his hair down, so I can do short strokes or points. Okay, so you don't have to show as much as this if you don't want to. Just a few here and there would be very good. So I'm going to go ahead and do his back. On the top, I'm not going to worry about hair sticking up. I'm just going to go ahead and have a few lines. I'm just going to stop that line and draw another one in there. And it makes it look like hair is layered on there. So I'm coming around and adding it. So you can do it right on here. Do it a little bit on this one, but I can come along and I can draw some thicker lines on top. Come around with the hooked lines or the lines just inside. So when I'm coming around and doing that body, I'm just going to add some fur lines in there. Take your time with those, and you don't have to add too many. I'm just going to do a whole bunch on this one so you can see it being done as many times as you need so that you could decide, do you want him to show lots and lots of fur or just a few, but I'm just adding them on down. Sometimes I'll make them look like a little bit like hooks because his fur is not soft, it's thick and chunky. So in between the legs here, and go on up and make some hooks. But since we're going to meet the two legs in here, I'm going to go up on the left side and then up on the right. And I have some of the fur just hanging down. Maybe he just jumped in from maybe he just jumped out of the water because the water would pull his hair down if he went swimming. So we want to have the hair going down on either side of his body and not sticking up straight up or anything. It can sort of follow a curve. You can have some that sort of come in this way if you want to. But on the sides, I definitely want my curves to be going down. So that you could draw them whatever way is comfortable. You go upward to draw them a little bit at a time. I just do some nice fur strokes or the sort of the jagged edge, the pointy edge. So make sure that you keep them small. You don't want it to look crazy. I'm not going to worry about his ears. That's probably much shorter hair. I'll draw his ears normally. And I'll draw his eyes normally. And his nose. Now, this is what he'll look like if you don't add that mouth. So if you don't add it, that's fine. You can color in the inside of the ears, the eyes, and the nose in black. So that's up to you how you want to do it. And they're just very plain features for this bear. You don't have to do anything fancy on it if you don't feel like it. So go ahead and finish his nose. I'll come back and do that. But let me finish the fur here. So I'm just coming along with the lines that are sort of coming in from the edge. And then I just want to outline my claws. You can color those in too. Usually their claws are really thick nail, not like our fingernails at all. Really, really thick claws. And they're usually black as well. So I'm going to come in between and get my toes drawn and colored in. So keep going around your animal and make sure that you get that fur that's bumpy. He might not, if he got shaved, Maybe he'd be nice and smooth underneath, but we can't tell because he needs this fur to keep nice and warm. Come around on the back too and add a couple of hooks, lines that go on down. Just a little, just following my circles. And I'll finish that up, but let me show you that on this one more time. So you would have light lines here that you can erase if you feel like it, but I'm going to come along here with a darker, more pressure, because now I really mean it. Now I really want it to show up, and I'm just coming along and drawing that fur, going up and down. I can put a couple extra strokes in there of pencil lines. When I'm drawing with my pencil, I can add in a couple extra little bitty things if I feel like it to show a little bit more fuzziness. And I want to do that on everything. I want to come all the way down on each side, make sure that I'm following gravity and that the hair follows down on the sides. Maybe it sticks up a little in the middle. Maybe he's got a few pieces of fur sticking up here. But I just want to follow my shapes around. And now it looks more like it has the texture of thick, coarse fur. So you want to go ahead and finish that up and pause the video if you still need to use this one for a reference. I'm going to go ahead and finish coloring this one. All right, I sped the video up mostly because I wanted to get my background colored in. And I want to use lots of different sort of soft lines and make sure I don't hit my snowflakes. Now your snowflakes don't have to be difficult or fancy if that's what you want to do in your picture. Maybe you want to show something else. Maybe you want to show, instead of a dark blue sky like this one, maybe you want to have a sunny day. So you could have something pretty and some clouds maybe and a nice sun shining in your background. So you can do that. But if you're coloring in a background like I am, it takes a long time to do it in a colored pencil because it only makes a small line. And if I'm drawing softly and gently like I am right here, it takes even longer. So that's okay if you're going to do that. But something I made when we did a project, if you were in Ridgeland for kindergarten or first grade, I may have been your art teacher at that time, and we had a bunch of snow pieces that we put together to make a snowman. So I could use some of those leftover ones. So you could use hole punch circles and glue those onto a nice colored background. It would have been much faster if I'd done this in crayon too. So you could add some nice snow falling that way. So you can draw circles and color around them like I did my snowflakes. You can glue on some circles like I'm going to on here to show that the snow is falling. But your background is up to you. This is whatever you decide that you want it to be. Now to finish up our polar bear, and sort of show you what we need to do here to give him, to really show that he would be a form and not just a flat shape, we want to add our shading. So this is our final step, and we do need to do it. It's important because if we don't show it, he just looks like white lines. What we want to do is think about it, whether the sun is out or the moon is out, light is going to come from the top. That's why our shadows are at our feet most of the time. And what we want to do is get some shadow in our bottom areas, the lower parts of the body. So not the top of the paws, but underneath. Now let me show you how this is going to look in pencil on this drawing. Okay, and I'm going to make mine probably darker than you're going to make yours, but you want to make it dark enough that I can see that you're trying it, because the pencil doesn't always want to show up on the camera. So when you take a photo of your work, make sure that you take a good photo and that you've added some shading that I can really see in your picture. I'm going to go ahead and just lightly color in on the bottom of his feet here with another circle there, with the pencil. So I'm just lightly shading. I'm not doing anything really rough. So I'm going to go in here in the bottom of his feet. Then I'm going to go underneath the form of his head that we made. So we did that shape and you've got it nice and furry now. So now I want to make the same kind of thing on the bottom part with pencil. All right, so where it's against the body, but the sun would not be shining. All right, and I want to do the same thing on the fur that is showing the underside of his body. Okay, that may not show up that well. Let me go ahead and do this. A colored pencil here. I'm going to go ahead and add it underneath his head. So on the outside lines, I'm not doing inside the circle, not this inside part, just outside of it where the fur is. I'm lightly going to draw some gray in here, just really, really close on the bottom part to add that shading. And I'm just really, really super soft pressure, no, almost no pressure at all, just so that I don't go over too far. It's okay if I go over my lines that I drew a little bit. I'm just sort of doing a soft touch. If you did the What's for Dessert project that was for the Thanksgiving break, that was sort of how we colored in the letters that spelled out yum. So I'm just doing some very, very light shading there. Now it already gives it a little bit more depth. I want to do the same thing under here because I know that that's the fur that is where the legs meet. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading on the bottom part because that is fur that would be in between his two legs there. It likes to sort of fold up in the middle if you look at a real polar bear's photo. So then I want to do the same thing under the body. The body came around. That was the second big circle that we made. So I'm going to put that in under the body there a little bit so that it looks like the body's out front. And then I'm going to put a little bit behind my main, this one. So underneath both my arches, I'm going to do it just a little bit outside of both of them. So here's the body arch and here's sort of the back arch. So I'm going to do those on the side. So this is gonna take a little bit of work. And if you didn't follow it, don't guess, just go ahead and replay the video. I'm going to put a little bit of shading here. And I want this to really show up, but you don't have to make it dark. So if yours isn't showing up, maybe you just need to make it a little bigger, your shaded areas. So I'm going to shade around his feet. The sun would not be shining in between his toes, but I can make my toes a little darker as I go because of it being colored pencil. So I'm going to color some shading in just on the bottoms of his feet. And I'm going to make sure that my toes are colored in. Much easier in crayon, but you might feel more comfortable doing this in pencil since crayon and colored pencil do not like to erase. So remember, I'm using this for the video. You have to use what you're comfortable with at home and whatever you have. So hopefully you can start in pencil and maybe you can come behind it in crayon because crayon will do the same effect. Let me do that on this one with some crayon. Let me finish his lines out. I hope you don't need to look at him anymore, this drawing. I'm going to go ahead and make some jagged fur lines, and then I'm going to come in and just do a little bit of shading. Now underneath, just a super, super soft touch. I pushed a lot harder to make those lines. Now I'm barely just touching it and moving it on the paper. So let me get his fur here. I'm going to shade in between because we know there's no light that's probably going to be showing in there. So I'm going to make this a little bit darker in between his feet because it's under his neck where his head would be sticking out. So this whole area probably isn't getting a lot of light. And it looks like I'm doing a whole lot of coloring. I'm not. I'm barely touching it. So I had a little bit. Here's my arch, the first arch that I made behind his head. I'm not going to color inside of it. I'm going to color outside of it a little bit on the second arch area. That was his back. So here's our lines. I'm pushing harder. That's one pressure. And then this is a different one. This is softer. I'm taking my time and I'm being much gentler. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Here I'll do his furry feet. And then I'll do some shadowing. Nice dark claws. It's a little less precise using a crayon, but if this is what you have, then you just go ahead and go for it. We're just practicing getting some shading techniques in, and we don't need to be experts yet. We're just trying to get an idea that he's not supposed to just be these lines. He's supposed to actually be a form. In order to show form, you need to show where light is and if there's a color change. So when you finish your picture up, just look for what areas you think are not going to be having a whole lot of light on. Finish it up by shading with your pencil, your crayon if you have one and you prefer to use crayon. If you have colored pencils, that is just fine. But remember, they don't like to erase. I'm just going to make my shaded areas a little bit bigger because I know that under his neck, it's probably not going to have a lot of sun shining on his fur. And it's okay if I go over my lines that I did to make the fur. So I'll just keep coloring in just really lightly on the bottom of his feet since they're closer to the ground. And I can keep going over it until I'm pretty happy with how much shading I've got in there. So it's okay if you go a little bit further, and you can even put a little bit of shading inside here if you feel like it. Now, the other thing is underneath them would also be dark. So in order to show that, I want to go ahead and make my lines that would show sort of some texture in the snow where he is standing. We don't want the line to be just plain and flat and boring because ice does not like to be plain and flat. We always think of it like it's going to be just as smooth as a sheet of glass, but glass is a very different thing from ice. So I'm just adding some bumps in here to make it look like just some bumpy lines to make it look like bumpy snow maybe that he's walking on. Okay, and then I can add in between, I can add some more shading because this would be underneath him where his shadow is casting on the snow. So if you feel like doing this part, you can do this too, so that you'll see this will need to be a little bit darker. You don't have to do this part. You can see on this one, he looks really great without it. But if you finished shading your polar bear and you think you want to just add a little bit more shading to show where his shadow is, you can put some shading on the ice itself. So shadows tend to be a little bit darker just because no light is shining at all, not even a reflection of light. So we can put some shadow underneath him there, and that way it sort of looks like his shadow would be cast on the ice. So the main thing is, though, make sure that you shade a little bit on your bear. You want to definitely get under his head to show that it's different from the rest of his body. You can even go around on the top if you want to. It actually looks pretty good if you add just a little tiny bit of shading on the top. You can do the same thing with the body part. You can go over behind this arch. You could go all the way around just a little bit if you want to. But this is when we have to learn how to use a much, much softer touch. I've talked about it on some other projects. But this is when we really need to actually do it on purpose and really make it look like it has form. So to finish this up, I'm going to go ahead and glue my circles down. And I'm going to go ahead and make the shadow that's on the ice a little bit more intense. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter as it gets closer to his feet, and he might see some sunlight in between his feet. So I'll go ahead and finish this up. Okay, so this one is basically finished. I went back and added a little bit more in here, which a little bit more shadow to make what is not a fur area look even darker so that it looks like a shadow on the eyes. So using a colored pencil and a regular pencil, you do not have to use any kind of color, but don't give up if you have crayon. But if you have pencil and you just want to draw it with pencil, go around and do your shading. This is a time when a pencil is your best friend. So you can add in layers of color just like you would on a crayon. We only just have the grayish color of the pencil, and we have to work hard to make it show up as black. So when you do your black of your nose and your eyes, short strokes are good to fill it in, but you want to take your time and really get in there. So make sure we do a really, really good coloring job. We get those edges filled in. And we don't have white paper showing through. So we want to really get in there and do a great job of coloring because pencil is a little bit different from things that have pigment. We want to definitely spread it in there. A lot of kids like to rub, but that just makes a mess when you're doing shading. It's like you're giving up and you just want to go ahead and smear it. Smearing is fun, but it doesn't show that you actually have the ability to create that shadow. So get in there and gently use your pencil. If you're using a crayon, that's okay. If that's all you have, go ahead. You can see it worked just fine. Here we have it with the crayon that's super, super light crayons, the dark lines for our shading. And then if we do it with a pencil, we can add in that fur. We can erase when we want to. We can add in extra lines if we want to make it even furrier. And we can decide if you're using a pencil, maybe you want to take a look at it and say, okay, I've got a little shading around the top of his head. Then step back a little bit and say, does that look right? Do you have shading on top of his head where it's separating his head from the back of his body? Or should I go ahead and take that off? If you used a pencil, you can decide and erase. You can even maybe try some shading on that back leg a little. Maybe you want to make a little bit more of that back leg darker. So experiment if you have pencil. If all you have is crayon, don't worry about it, but just use it super, super lightly on the areas that you know are different body parts. This gives it some dimension and some depth. You can even get underneath his snout just a little bit and add in that pencil or that crayon or that colored pencil. And it just really helps things to show form if you're showing an area of it that has some shadow. So we're used to everything being a nice bright color, and that's terrific, but we've got to show the areas that aren't the brightest by adding that shading. So you can add those in, okay, and take your time because this is a skill that we definitely want to use and practice and get better at with time. So what better way to do it than with a polar bear? So make your background your own. You know, yours doesn't have to look anything like this. People think, oh, I have to copy it to make it look just like the teacher made it. No, you don't have to. These were just some things that I found. So some leftover circles that were punched that were still in the storage room. You don't have to have them. Maybe you want to make a totally different background and maybe you want some mountains or something behind it. But make sure that you add a background. Make sure that he's not just standing on a white background, because he's going to look like he's floating in space. So put something behind him so that it looks like he is on the ground. So take your time with your project. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And I can't wait to see what you create. Have a great day.